I mean, you talked about the whole Malcolm and Eddie thing. Like, what do you think was some of the most racist things that you've dealt with being in Hollywood?
Hollywood, man.
Just Hollywood in general?
Yes.
When asked about the struggles he faced in Hollywood, Eddie Griffin didn't hold back. Hollywood, man, just Hollywood in general, he said, reflecting on the racial challenges he and others have faced. One of the most surprising revelations was that he and Malcolm-Jamal Warner didn't actually get along off camera. In real life, we didn't, he admitted. Despite their differences, every week before filming, they'd come together, bow their heads, and pray. That small act was their way of grounding themselves before stepping into a world that often didn't respect them. Following Malcolm-Jamal Warner's unexpected death, the silence from Hollywood was deafening. Fans were outraged and Eddie was visibly furious. Look at the kind of money they'll invest in unknown white talent just starting out, he pointed out. Back when we all came out from Martin's show to ours, there was a clear difference. He believed the industry was intentionally ignoring Warner's contributions, effectively erasing a man who played a major role in shaping black television history. There were no tributes, no major coverage, just silence. And Eddie wasn't buying the coincidence. I'm tired of running for shade, he said, tired of being hustled and played. His frustration boiled over into broader issues, asking why black success always seemed to come with a price in America. Even when it looks like we've made it, aren't we still crying about how hard it is to be black in this country? Eddie wasn't just mourning a friend. He was mourning the erasure of a legacy, the quiet deletion of someone who stood for something. Malcolm and Eddie had a long, complex history. Both were black men navigating an industry that constantly silenced them. Both spoke out against racism when others stayed quiet. They weren't just actors, they were truth tellers. Malcolm had long warned about media manipulation. His perspective came from years of fighting hidden battles in the entertainment industry. One of his wake-up calls came after his time on The Cosby Show. When he moved to Malcolm and Eddie in the mid-90s, he realized something startling: showing black people in a positive light wasn't normal. It was treated as strange, even unwanted. I came from a show that made history, he said. It proved black people could be funny without being stereotypical. But the people in charge weren't interested in continuing that legacy. They told me, we didn't bring you over here for that, this is what we do. It was a hard lesson. While The Cosby Show showed black families with dignity, that approach wasn't the standard, it was the exception. On Malcolm and Eddie, Malcolm expected similar treatment, but instead faced writers, producers, and executives who clung to harmful stereotypes. That's when he understood the truth. Bill Cosby had rare control over the image of his show. Most black actors, even stars, never got that level of creative influence. I watched Mr. Cosby push back on writers for 8 years, Malcolm said. Things you didn't see on that show weren't because they weren't written, it was because Mr. Cosby said no, that's not what we're doing. But with Malcolm and Eddie, he didn't have that power. It wasn't my show, he admitted, but it was my check. This realization marked a turning point for Malcolm. He had assumed the creative standards on The Cosby Show were the norm. In reality, they were rare privileges. Without that power, most black actors were forced into roles that reinforced stereotypes, roles that harmed both their public image and their communities. Despite creative tension and personal friction, both Malcolm and Eddie understood the bigger goal: reach 100 episodes and land a syndication deal, but they were cut short at 88. The reason they got tired, Malcolm said, tired of me fighting with writers, tired of Eddie's shenanigans. The cancellation wasn't about ratings, it was about resistance. They were pushing back, and the network didn't want to deal with it. Malcolm began to understand just how risky it was to challenge stereotypes in Hollywood. The cost of demanding better representation was losing future income and opportunity. The message was clear, he said. Speak up and you lose financial freedom. By 2016, the rise of reality television had changed the business. Reality TV changed the financial face of the industry, Malcolm explained. Networks could spend less money, avoid union conflicts, and skip working with writers by leaning into unscripted drama. It wasn't just about cost, it was about control. and it hurt the integrity of the industry, especially when it came to portraying black people in meaningful ways. Cheap reality shows often thrived on conflict and sensationalism, painting black communities in a negative light. Meanwhile, networks ignored more thoughtful, scripted shows that portrayed black life with nuance. For Malcolm, this wasn't just about creative vision, it was about economics. Harmful portrayals were profitable, positive, complex representations weren't. Eddie Griffin had been warning about this for years. Unlike Malcolm, whose critiques were often careful and subtle, Eddie was blunt. He believed Hollywood had a clear pattern: build up black men, then tear them down when they get too successful. It's a systematic effort to destroy every black male entertainer's image, he said. They don't want anyone leaving this business clean. He pointed to examples: Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan gambled and then his dad got killed. Then they tried to tie that together, Eddie noted. You're not going to die like that unless someone wants you to. Eddie saw it all as connected, not random tragedies, but parts of a broader strategy. The most successful black entertainers seem to face sudden, career-ending scandals once they hit a certain level. Cosby, long seen as a role model, had his legacy dismantled. Eddie didn't believe it was all coincidence. He saw a system designed to keep black success in check. Even the way the media talked about black men reinforced stereotypes. If a black man does something, it says Black John Jones. But if a white man does it, it's just John Jones. Eddie said, that isn't right. The language used in headlines became a weapon, one that white bigots could point to and say, see, there they go again. For Eddie, the treatment of Malcolm's death fit the pattern. While celebrities gave polite condolences or stayed silent, Eddie raised questions. The timing, the lack of media coverage, the erasure of Malcolm's legacy, it all felt too familiar. Malcolm had been planning to write a revealing autobiography, had become more outspoken in recent years, and was gaining traction. Then suddenly, he was gone. Eddie Griffin's frustration wasn't just about losing a friend. It was about watching the same story unfold again, a black man who stood for truth getting erased instead of honored. When Malcolm-Jamal Warner passed, Eddie was one of the very few people in the entertainment industry who publicly questioned the circumstances. While most people either offered generic condolences or said nothing at all, Eddie's tone was different: suspicious, urgent, angry, and Eddie had reasons. This wasn't the first time he had seen something like this. According to him, it was a pattern every time a black entertainer became too powerful, too vocal, or too independent. Something always seemed to happen: a scandal, a fall from grace, a mysterious death. To Eddie, it wasn't random, it was by design. Chadwick Boseman was one example. While most of the world saw him as a talented actor quietly battling cancer, people like Eddie noticed something more. Chadwick had been using his final years to call out Hollywood's sanitized narratives, pushing for real, authentic black storytelling. His interviews in 2019 and 2020 had taken a sharp turn toward political commentary. He wasn't just acting anymore, he was speaking up, and then he was gone. The timing was chilling. Nipsey Hussle's case was even more suspicious to many. He wasn't just a rapper, he was building a new kind of independence in his community. He was set to meet with the LAPD to discuss gang violence and community-led solutions. His focus had shifted to ownership, financial literacy, and generational wealth. He was creating structures that didn't rely on white-run institutions. Then, just days before that big meeting, he was shot and killed in his own parking lot. Dave Chappelle faced a different kind of punishment. In 2005, he walked away from a $50 million contract after realizing the industry was twisting his voice and controlling his message. He spent years in the media wilderness, and even when he returned, the attacks didn't stop. Every time he spoke too honestly about power structures, race, or manipulation in entertainment, cancel campaigns popped up. The message from the industry was consistent. If you speak too freely, you will pay for it. But Malcolm's case felt even more traceable. In early 2024, he was doing regular interviews about his career and family life, nothing too controversial. But by mid-2024, he started talking more directly about how Hollywood mistreats black actors. By the end of 2024, he was using his platform to expose cultural theft and media manipulation. He was teaching people how to spot the game. Then, out of nowhere, he dies in Costa Rica just 48 hours after posting an Instagram message that called out exploitation and described black people as being hustled and played. To people like Eddie Griffin, that wasn't a coincidence. That was a red flag. Malcolm had something that made him especially dangerous to the system's credibility. He had been in the industry for over 40 years, and he had earned the respect of fans, peers, and audiences. From his days as Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, Malcolm had shown that black characters could be complex, loving, artistic, and smart without falling into old stereotypes. He had done it without shouting, without being controversial, and without ever forgetting who he was. The brilliance of the Huxtables wasn't in what they said it was, in how normal they were. The show didn't feel the need to prove its blackness by leaning into pain or struggle. Instead, the family spoke multiple languages, loved jazz and classical music, valued education, and supported each other deeply. All of that while being fully, proudly black. That subtle approach was revolutionary. And Malcolm understood that power. What most people didn't know was that Malcolm had been thinking deeply about these issues since he was a child. His father, Robert Warner, named him after Malcolm X and jazz legend Malcolm-Jamal. At just 6 years old, Malcolm was reading about black leaders like Richard Wright, Langston Hughes, and Mary McLeod Bethune. These were names his white classmates had never heard of. By 6th grade, his favorite book was poems on the life and death of Malcolm X. That kind of education shaped him. "My dad really gave me a sense of identity and peace," Malcolm once said. "He helped me understand who I was and what I represented." His parents divorced when he was young, but his father remained a powerful influence. His early exposure to black literature, history, and art gave Malcolm a foundation that would later guide his decisions in Hollywood. He wasn't just acting, he was aware of how every role could either uplift or damage the image of black people. And his mother, Pamela Warner, played an equally important role. While many child stars fell into fame and lost themselves, Pamela made sure Malcolm stayed grounded. She protected him from the dangerous aspects of fame, teaching him to think long-term, remain independent, and stay loyal to his principles. That's part of why he never fell into the traps that hurt so many other young actors: drugs, legal problems, burnout. Malcolm stayed on course. As an adult, Malcolm didn't just act, he became a multi-talented artist and speaker. He won a Grammy with Robert Glasper for their spoken word piece Jesus Children of America, which reflected on the Sandy Hook tragedy with sensitivity and intelligence. His own spoken word album, Hiding in Plain View, tackled issues like racism, cultural stereotypes, and black self-awareness. One line from his piece Blackfist Beautiful stood out: "We used to fight for our right for freedom, but now we fight for the right to be dumb for free." That wasn't just a catchy line. It was a deep truth about the shifts in black culture and how entertainment could sometimes trap people in cycles that looked like success, but led to disconnection and loss of identity. But Malcolm's life wasn't all triumph. He went through deep personal pain. One of the most devastating moments came when his longtime girlfriend Michelle Thomas, who played Justine on The Cosby Show, died of cancer at just 30 years old. Malcolm was by her side until the end, even climbing into bed to hold her as she passed. Later, he also endured a painful breakup with actress Regina King. These experiences made him deeply private about his personal life. He chose to stay single for years, only marrying at age 45, when he felt truly ready for a lasting, mature relationship. For Malcolm, art was never just for entertainment. It was education, a form of activism. He didn't blame or preach, he invited people to think deeper. Even when he joked about needing a respectability politics police to monitor his message, it was clear he took his role seriously. He wanted to speak truth without having it twisted the way Cosby's message eventually was. And that's what made the aftermath of his death so disturbing. Within hours of the news breaking, the media narrative was tightly controlled. There was no real exploration of what he had been saying or planning in the months leading up to his death. And even more concerning, his podcast episodes became harder to find. Some of his more direct content had been moved to less visible platforms. His final Instagram post, the one that called out captors and warned about black exploitation, was quickly framed as possible evidence of mental health issues, not political awareness. That shift in tone from truth teller to troubled man was all too familiar. One of the most unsettling parts of Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death wasn't just the fact that he drowned, it was how quickly and quietly the story disappeared from the headlines. Malcolm had been very public about working on a powerful autobiography, one he said would share stories that needed to be told. But after he passed, no one in the media followed up on it. Not a single outlet asked about the manuscript. It was as if the book never existed. That alone was strange. When celebrities die, especially respected figures like Malcolm, entertainment media usually digs deep into their unfinished projects. But this time, there was silence. The one thing that could have exposed how Hollywood really operates behind the scenes was being ignored. To people like Eddie Griffin, that was not an accident. In his immediate reaction to Malcolm's death, Eddie didn't sound like someone offering routine condolences. He sounded like someone raising the alarm. While other celebrities kept their comments brief and safe, Eddie seemed to know what most of them didn't want to say out loud, that something about this didn't feel right. Eddie had been warning people for years. He spoke in interviews, podcasts, and stand-up routines about how black entertainers are handled by the industry. And when someone like Malcolm, with 40 years of experience and real insider knowledge, starts giving people the tools to recognize how they're being exploited, that can make powerful people very uncomfortable. Malcolm's mission toward the end of his life was clear. He wanted to teach black communities how to recognize manipulation, how to protect themselves from being used. That wasn't just activism, that was a direct challenge to the system. He was no longer playing the game, he was pulling back the curtain, and unlike many others, people were actually listening to him. That made him a threat. He had been part of the system long enough to understand how it worked. From the outside, people still remembered him as Theo Huxtable, the lovable, funny older brother. But behind the scenes, Malcolm had grown into a sharp, careful thinker who used every part of his platform with intention. His podcast, Not All Hood, wasn't just entertainment, it was about deconstructing how the media defines black life. He was tackling deep issues not with anger or outrage, but with precision. And yet somehow, after everything he had built, everything he was still planning, he dies on a family vacation in Costa Rica, smiling in pictures just hours before, no signs of distress, and then gone. Eddie Griffin wasn't the only one who found it suspicious. Many fans pointed to Malcolm's final Instagram post, in which he spoke openly about being hustled and played, and about how black people are manipulated. In hindsight, that message felt like a warning, and it came just 48 hours before his death. What's more troubling is how quickly the media redefined that post. Instead of treating it like a political statement, a piece of cultural criticism, it was spun as a possible mental health red flag. The conversation shifted from, "What was he warning us about?" to, "Was he okay?" That reframing is a classic tactic, one that critics say is used to erase the credibility of black voices who speak too much truth. Turn them from visionary to victim, from truth teller to troubled soul, from mentor to martyr, and even now, months after his death, there's still barely any media coverage, barely any tribute from the industry he gave 4 decades to. No documentaries announced, no major retrospectives, just a few headlines, "Former Cosby Kid dies," That's it. A man who dedicated his life to shifting the image of Black America was reduced to a footnote. Eddie Griffin made it clear this wasn't the first time something like this happened, and sadly, it probably won't be the last. He spoke with a kind of rage that came from knowing the system up close, from seeing how Black brilliance is often tolerated but never truly protected, especially when it starts to speak out. Throughout his career, Eddie has repeated one theme over and over, that Black men in America, particularly those who speak boldly, don't get to die quietly. They're either discredited, erased, or turned into cautionary tales. And Malcolm knew that. He saw it happening. That's why, in his final years, he worked to mentor younger artists, to pass on knowledge, to challenge tokenism, and to take back the narrative that others tried to write for him. Looking back, it seems like Malcolm and Eddie weren't just co-workers or collaborators, they were comrades in the same struggle. A struggle against the quiet, insidious racism of Hollywood. A battle against the slow erasure of Black legacy. And most of all, a fight to be seen fully, truthfully, and with dignity. Malcolm-Jamal Warner didn't want fame for fame's sake. He used his success to educate, to question, to create meaningful work. From his Grammy-winning spoken word to his podcasts to his roles on screen, it was all intentional. All pointed toward one goal, to show that Black stories are rich, complex, beautiful, and worthy of respect. In one of his more recent public appearances, Malcolm wore all black head to toe. He spoke about what it feels like to be visible but not truly seen, heard but not understood. That message now rings with chilling resonance. It was the same pain Eddie Griffin had described so many times, being known, but never valued. As the dust settles on Malcolm's passing, fans and critics alike are starting to piece together the final chapter. He wasn't sick, he wasn't struggling, he was active, planning, thriving, and suddenly, just like that, he's gone. No major outlets investigated, no high-profile tributes aired, just silence. Eddie Griffin isn't mourning privately. He's making sure people hear what's being left out. Why did it take so long for the autopsy to come out? He asked. Why is there no real footage or eyewitness reports? Why are the networks barely talking about this? These aren't just questions. They're demands for accountability. Because for every Malcolm-Jamal Warner who speaks out and gets erased, there are millions watching wondering what will happen if they speak up too. The message they're receiving is loud. If you tell the truth, if you challenge the system, if you try to shift the narrative, they will make sure your story ends quietly. But Malcolm's story shouldn't end like that. He spent his entire life trying to expand what Black representation could look like, not just on screen, but in the culture as a whole. He wanted people to see that Black art didn't need to be confined to struggle or pain or comedy. It could be layered, joyful, thoughtful, intellectual. It could teach, and it could change lives. Even in death, Malcolm is still teaching, still challenging us to pay attention, to recognize how creativity gets stolen, how stories get rewritten, how legacies get flattened to fit into neat headlines that tell none of the truth. And maybe, just maybe, the best way to honor him is to listen to what he was really saying. To stop dismissing these moments as coincidence, to question what we're told and who's doing the telling, to make sure that the next time a Black truth teller rises, their voice doesn't get buried before the world hears what they had to say. Because if Malcolm warned us once, and we ignored it, then what excuse do we have the next time?